Well, this is now panel, a conversation. I'm expecting this one. Why immersive audio is a critical component of immersive experiences, a practical guide to production, delivery, and rendering of spatial audio. And we have today Matthew Neutra, Amy Lameyer, and Vicky Nauman. And I will introduce Amy, who will be the moderator. Amy is a managing partner at WXR Fund and investing in early stage companies with female leadership that are transforming business and human interaction using spatial computing, VR plus AR and AI. Amy is also on the board of AR/VR Academy, which promotes diversity in emerging technologies through education. She is the author of Sound and AR in the book Convergence, How the World Will Be Painted with Data. And she created enteringvr.net to assist others to learn about the potential of AR/VR across industries. Amy has over 18 years of experience in a high-growth technology industry in corporate development, mergers and acquisitions, engineering, and finance. And of course, I'm a big fan not only of her speech, but her actions. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thanks, Rosario. It's so nice to see you again. Rosario was one of the accelerator companies. WXR Fund had 3 cohorts and 26 companies go through the accelerator. And at this point, we have 10 companies in the portfolio of our fund, again, investing in VR, AR, AI with female founder. So thanks for that warm introduction. I would like to turn it over to Vicky and Matthew to tell us a little bit more about what you guys do.
Great. Well, I'm really happy to be here. My name is Vicky Nauman, and I run a consulting and advisory firm called Cross Border Works, sitting in between music and technology. And mostly I work with tech companies who want to do something meaningful with music and help them make sense out of the very counterintuitive music industry. And I'm really excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Matt Neutra. I'm the lead audio experience engineer at Bose in our corporate concept group. And I've been working on immersive experiences for 2 decades of various types, but in the last couple of years I've been focused primarily on spatial audio and the production of spatial audio and spatial audio workflows, primarily for products that have open ear audio and sensors in them to do interesting things. And this week's a pretty exciting week. A lot of really cool announcements from some of our friends at Niantic and folks that we know at Facebook, and folks at a fruit company in Cupertino will probably have something on the horizon.
It's true.
But in all of these endeavors, the unsung hero is spatial audio.
I agree. It's obviously been a really interesting few years for us, and the rise of virtual experiences has been enormous. And as we were talking in the prep, audio is just such a core component of anything virtual, because if you don't have audio, you don't have communication to a certain extent for most things. So it's just been really interesting to see all of these announcements from the larger tech companies come out and talk about new technologies in this space, because obviously they think it's important as well. Mm-hmm. So today we're going to dive into some of the distribution and the production of spatial audio with some experts that have been doing this for a long time. So maybe can we kick off and talk about some of the things that you've worked on in the past year or two, and just how have things changed, particularly pre-pandemic versus now?
You want to take that?
Oh, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, yeah. So for the last year, actually year and a half, I've been really focused on the arc of the spatial audio story and the arc of immersive experience stories, and coming up with sort of a topology to describe that world, so that when you're talking to people whose eyes would normally glaze over, you have a language to use to describe that process and the impact to people. Because at the end of the day, all of these things are really about storytelling and either helping people connect with other people, helping people connect with the world's information, or helping people connect with culturally significant experiences. So primarily my focus has been working backwards from that human experience and then figuring out the workflows that are required to get those experiences to those people in a scalable way.
Yeah, no, on my side, it's like looking at the music industry. It's one of the most exciting times that I've ever seen, because partially because the industry was one of the first to be disrupted, the digital canary in the coal mine, but there's stability to the industry again because of streaming revenues, and it's, you know, these things are not necessarily working for everyone, but the industry as a whole is much healthier, and that has resulted in an openness by major labels, major publishers, independent artists, independent labels, to take the music and make it go out into games, fitness, immersive experiences, everything. And I think in a lot of these environments, like if you think of Spotify and Apple Music, music is the meal. And in all of these other experiences, music acts as the salt and pepper on top of the meals of games and all the experiences. And there is, you know, a lot of this really started when Marshmello did a set in Fortnite. And I'm one of these people who for 10 years has been saying to the music industry, look at gaming, look at these companies where there's low barrier to entry and, you know, in-app purchasing, and companies are making billions. But it wasn't really until Marshmello did the set, and that was 10 million people in one set, it was a paradigm shift for the industry. And so for anyone who's in here who's thinking a little bit about, you know, I'd love to have more music, or I'd love to engage with artists, have them be that salt and pepper on your meal, this is a fantastic time, and it's unprecedented, really. But I think that when we think about spatial audio, a lot of what the music industry has been serving is technology that was created back in the 1970s with stereo. And so as music gets laid into all of these other experiences, it makes sense that we create something that's more contextual, more immersive, and more natural.
Can I get a quick show of hands? Who knows what spatial audio is? Oh, great. Then we don't need to define what it is. But maybe we can talk about, and particularly because the three of us are deep music lovers, maybe talk about a few of the experiences that you guys have seen, you know, beyond Marshmello, that where you think that spatial audio has really added to the experience.
So a company, Supersphere, did a revivalist concert from in New Orleans, Preservation Hall, and recorded it in spatial audio, and they broadcast it in spatial audio. And we did a little experiment with them to add head tracking to that to enhance the immersion. So that was a near and dear experience that I can talk about, where the human body becomes part of the musical experience, even though it's a digital experience. And so we're going to see a lot of this with what Niantic's doing, what Facebook is doing. But those are the experiences that give you a sense of presence, and those are the ones that really resonate. And so the tools that we're getting handed to us today and last week and yesterday are all the tools that will help us have that sense of presence, and more importantly, break down two key things that we've been constrained by in music, which is the constraint of physical space and the constraint of time. And so when you have a digital extension of that experience, you no longer have only 3,000 seats in the Orpheum Theater in Boston. You have an infinite number of seats. There may be 3,000 people who can experience it in that one physical way, but that digital extension breaks down the barrier of space. And then, you know, that event happens at a time, and we can now, through these tools, break down that barrier as well. So if you're an artist and you're looking to be a musician or artist that wants to have a living, normally you'd have to go out and tour and break your back to, you know, make ends meet. But now everybody has this digital extension that can really accelerate the success of artists. But to answer your question, that sense of presence and that connection between the physical and digital world, I think, is really the thing that's the most compelling.
I also listen to dark field radio.
Oh, yeah.
And that to me was really eye-opening, because anyone who's doing art, whether it's, you know, an NFT, a digital NFT, or it's an art show, a live music performance, a recorded podcast, it's storytelling. And so there is something that I think once you start really listening to the difference of the presence and the sense that you are in the space and you lose yourself in the environment, I think there's going to be a kind of before and after moment where we will get to a point in the future, it'll probably take a number of years, where we'll say, remember when we didn't have any of that and we listened to things and they sounded very flat. But I also think, the other thing that is happening, and this conference is really bringing it up, is the creator economy and creator tools that are out there. And this giving artists, giving podcasters, storytellers the tools to be able to use spatial audio in how they're crafting their stories, that's just, that's transformative.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, a lot of times for people who have been in these industries for as long as we all have, you start to see cycles. And there were all sorts of things that were done in like the early 2000s, but we didn't have the networks and the operating systems and the smart mobile devices to be able to really bring this to scale. And we do now.
Yeah, I mean, we were going to have another member of the panel, Jacqueline from Mach 1, and obviously they're doing a lot to provide tools to create spatial audio. Have you guys have both worked with her before? Maybe you could talk about how that experience has been and what she would recommend that if people want to try their tools set to reach out, I think.
Yeah. So Mach 1 has a number of tools that really enhance the spatial audio workflow. And there are lots of tools out in the world. There's Dolby Atmos, obviously Sony 360 Reality. And what Mach 1 has done is created not only a set of tools for digital audio workstations that let you do spatial audio panning, they also have done something incredibly unique, which is to create a transcoding engine to take any one format of spatial audio and translate it to any other spatial audio format, which is a really, really powerful thing in that it democratizes these tools, and it also unconstrains the creator. Because if you are someone who uses Pro Tools and you use Dolby Atmos, then that's the tool that you're using, and you're locked into that workflow. And one of my passions is all about workflow and workflow accessibility. And the current workflows are really not that accessible. But what Mach 1 has done very uniquely is to create a very accessible tool set that also is transportable. And so, for folks who are starting to get into spatial audio, there's a lot to digest from a workflow point of view. When we made the transition from monaural audio to stereo audio, the tools got a little bit more complicated. You now had a panning knob to play with. And of course, people would abuse the panning knob because it's a new thing. And the same thing is true with spatial audio,
Right.
where there are many more knobs and buttons and thingamajigs to twiddle. And that's a dangerous thing for a creator, but it's something that you have to, manipulate, figure out. But anyway, so coming back to your question about Mach 1, they've sort of simplified that process of understanding spatial audio and implementing it, and then created a set of tools that lets you translate that to the target platform that you're going to be working with, or the target platform that your client or your endpoint is going to be dealing with.
Yeah, I've definitely been in or heard some of those audio experiences where you think, there is no reason that's needed to have spatial audio. you know what I mean? Like gone into Spotify and somebody that's remixed something in a way that I thought, oh, it's just like turning the knob back and forth.
Yeah.
I think it's a great,
which is fine. It's if we're creating, we're exploring, but.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely a resistance from most labels to go back and remix their existing recordings, and partially because It's just a very, very precious thing with the artist, that the artist produced and released something and they liked it, they signed off on it, and that's
To sound that way.
to sound that
Yeah.
way.
Right.
And then on the user side, people become really, really attached to the music that they care about. It becomes part of their life. It has a lot of long-term value, and so you get used to hearing things. And if you're listening to Led Zeppelin, it sounds very different than if you're listening to something that was mixed digitally and released recently. So I don't feel like there's a huge appetite for overlaying and remixing everything into spatial audio. But I'm sure there will probably be some companies that come up and have an enormous check and want to try to experiment with this with entire catalogs. But I think where it's really going to get interesting is getting the tools in the hands of artists and letting the art and the technology evolve hand in hand. And that will help to light a path for us on what ultimately this is going to be like for recorded audio. I think that for video or live performances, I think there's an enormous opportunity, especially when we're in the kind of coming out of the pandemic, where we're going to have hybrid of live performances and live streams, and everyone wants to be in the room. And so using spatial audio in a live setting, the bar's over there, that the bass is over on this side, the crowd's behind you, that's really, really powerful. But there's a whole ecosystem. It's not, you can't just mix something and then everybody can hear it. It has to go through the original mixing and processing, and then encoding, decoding, have the right equipment, be in the right setting. And so we're working on that entire ecosystem. But I feel like a lot of it is just going to start with the art and the tools.
Yeah, I definitely hear you. For me, as an audio first person, if I'm in an immersive experience and it doesn't have spatial audio, I don't feel immersed. And then if I'm in a mobile or an AR-based experience, it can make me feel more immersed, right? So that spatial audio component. So I definitely key. So it sounds like quite a workflow or quite a process to create spatial audio right now. Maybe let's dig into a few challenges. And it sounds expensive. Is it let's talk about that.
Can be. So if you're gonna have a full Dolby Atmos setup, with height speakers and everything, you can expect to spend tens of thousands, if not, hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up a studio. But there's a really interesting thing going on, which is there's this, and this happens in all kinds of different technology progressions, where you go from elite creators to prosumer creators, like the pros that are working in this field but have other jobs perhaps, and then to consumer creators, TikTok, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. And the workflows that most of us end up working with, and I actually mixed an entire album spatially in my living room on my laptop with headphones. Because it was, that's what I had. It was a pandemic, and I had bunny slippers, and I had a laptop, and I had some headphones, and the headphones were the monitor. So I had a pair of modified Bose headphones that were wired to the laptop that let me create a virtual speaker system. And because it has head tracking, when I turned my head, those objects stayed in place, and was able to do that for, let me estimate the cost of that. $500. I paid my $250 for a legit Reaper license. I had my Mach 1 spatial audio panner from my friend Jackie for free. Thanks, Jackie. And then I had my Bose headphones, and that was it. And so, yes, it can be really expensive, but all of these things shift from elite creators to prosumers to consumers. And an analog to that, or an example of that, would be desktop publishing. So being a graphic designer used to be a very specialized, elite skill. Then Apple released the Macintosh, and everyone's a fontographer, and now everyone's a designer. And now any word processor that you have has page layout functionality in it. And so we're seeing the same thing with AR. So Niantic released, Lightship. Product manager sitting right over there. She's a former Bose colleague. And that's the arc of this story playing out over and over again, where you take elite, prosumer, consumer, and
where are we in the curve right now?
Right now we just nicked the edge of the prosumer part of the curve. So a couple weeks ago, Apple released Dolby Atmos in Logic Pro. You can download the Mach 1 tools as a trial for free at mach1spatial.com. Plug, Jackie.
Yeah. Please do this, all of you. And I'd love to see it.
And so we're sort of on the edge of this, and so there's also different domains of that, right? So there's the creation of content, the delivery of content, and then the rendering of content. And so what does that mean in real world terms? It means on the creation side, you have Pro Tools, you have Mach 1, you have all these other things. On the delivery side, you have platforms like, game engine platforms. You have Apple Music, Apple TV, Apple Fitness. You have, Spotify, and so forth. But and under the hood, you have Brightcove and AWS and these platforms that are now supporting these formats that you create in this first pillar. And on the tail end, how do you play it back? What is your target device? Who's your audience? I've got my Bose frames, right? So if this is my target device,
right,
I have to do, thank you, Joanna Popper. Checks in the mail. So there's the user arc, which is, elite, prosumer, creator. And then there's the workflow arc, which is create, deliver, and render. And then there's the semantic industry part of it, which I'll throw over to Vicki, and she can talk about that part of it, because that's also important.
Yeah, when I look at the industry like a pyramid, where at the very bottom of this huge base of hobbyist artists, people who release music on CD Baby, people who are not necessarily making a living, but they really love to put their music out. Then there's the 1% at the top, the Lady Gagas and the Weeknd and all of the artists who are fully managed, usually by major label, have huge teams. But there's a big fat middle. And these are artists. This is by a long measure the fastest growing segment of the industry. And they're independent artists, independent labels, artists who have retained their own rights because they want to maintain creative control. And that's where I think all of this is going to happen, is going to be those artists who have a creative vision that they can then realize. They're not necessarily beholden to someone in a major label telling them that you have to be more pop or you have to look like this. And that's where things tend to happen at the edges of the music industry as well, people and artists who are pushing the boundaries on this. And we've also got a dynamic right now where a lot of these things are gated off by major labels who have the right to say yes or no to the catalog of hits. But I feel like there's enough diversification in the entire landscape to be able to get scale with this, but we also need a destination where users who are interested in it can go and they can get enough content. One of the companies that I spoke to that has done a lot of remixing, and they've gone back to master recordings from years ago and really done, probably a far more labor-intensive work than is reasonable. The biggest complaint that they got from their audience is that there wasn't enough of that kind of music to come back to. And so, we have to have this sweet spot of developing enough of the destinations, enough of the content, and then making the technology accessible so that casual fans can actually understand what it is that they need to do in order to experience it. And I don't think we're quite there yet. But I think Apple is doing a really good job of starting to educate the market.
Great. what are you seeing in terms of, my assumption would be that artists would be leaning more into new technologies and looking at ways to be creative in that way. Do you think as we come, on the other side of the pandemic, that will go away, that will stay? I mean, working with artists in the past, what are you thinking in terms of how they're going to continue to embrace new technology, immersive technologies, spatial audio?
I think that coming out of the pandemic, artists will have had some exposure to these tools and new methods of breaking down time and space to have a bigger audience. And so I think it's going to be really important that artists who want to be successful take advantage of these technologies and also understand how to leverage them creatively, because yes, technology is great. It's a shiny object that can be very alluring, but at the end of the day, it's really about how effective are these tools for storytelling, how effective are these tools for the artist, and also how low friction they are. So I'm a huge workflow person, and right now, spatial audio workflows are kind of terrible. And so if you're an artist and you want to spend your valuable time expressing yourself, you're not going to choose the most difficult tool to use. You're going to choose the most expressive tool to use. And so I think artists will absolutely, they're sort of early adopter artists who will suffer through, like I'm one of those suffer through artists. I will suffer through technology because there's something wrong with me. But most artists don't have that problem and would prefer to use the most expressive tool. And so they'll probably continue to push the tool makers to, come up with better workflows, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's also, for probably 10 years, there has just been a fire hose of tools for artists, for direct to fan, all the different ways of engagement, different ways of, understanding the dynamics of how their music is traveling throughout the internet and what's working and what isn't working. And so it's gotten to the point where it's really overwhelming to most teams because they're like, well, first and foremost, we need to make really great music, but then we have all of these tools, and I feel like this is great for the startup economy because there are very specific use cases, and artists are kind of like redefining what success is. Artists are redefining how they want to engage with their fans. They're redefining what they want their music to sound like, where they want it to be. If you think about the fact that, we talk about stereo being the last really big invention. Well, with music, we're still releasing music in the containers of like the 1950s, which are 3-minute songs and albums that were constrained by what a CD or what a piece of vinyl could hold. And so we're starting to now see music creation really, really change. No longer do we have really long intros. You don't get to the melody or the chorus until 2 minutes into the song. No, you have to bring all of that up front in the first 20 seconds. And so we see artists who are starting to evolve the form and the format of their art, the sound of it, and I think the tools that are going to emerge are going to have to be really, really intuitive. They have to be plugins to existing workstations and existing processes, and there's going to be a really, really great startup and probably enterprise economy to be able to make it easier in the studio, and then once they start producing this, then we have to light up all of these different sections of the value chain.
Let's talk a little bit broader than music, and we've talked about storytelling, but where have you seen immersive and spatial audio be critical outside of the music space?
So of course there are industrial applications where you have mission critical information. So in the automotive industry specifically, here technologies which creates a lot of the mapping infrastructure for the automotive industry has actually integrated Mach 1 into their SDK, which is not an accident. I mean, this is, you're in a vehicle and you're getting information spatially, like normally, something happens here, something happens here. But now we're synthesizing that information and creating navigation cues or, obstacle cues and other things. So that's one example. Tailspin, who does some really interesting AI-based content creation tools for industrial applications, has created AI-based characters that have, synthesized voices, and there's spatial audio involved there because you're using a VR headset to do that. So yeah, those are some out of the music industry applications. And then, when we were working on Bose AR and putting audio in the world, so basically geocaching audio experiences and having spatial audio that's oriented to north, that was another really great example of blending the real world and the augmented world with just audio. And actually, the thing that's really interesting about that is that, everybody's talking about cognitive load now, which is a critical component to creating experiences, because your brain is like a crappy 386 computer. It's not very fast, but it's massively parallel. But it has limitations, and technology has well outpaced our ability to perceive it. And so, there's the human factor of the spatial audio experience. And spatial audio is actually a very low cognitive load augmentation compared to visuals. So we're going to see, I think, a lot of people bumping up against the edges of biology and then pulling back so that they're creating experiences that are not bad for you.
I think particularly as we see an evolution of smart glasses, right? So, trying to put visual content on top of reality, there's only so much that can be, that one can consume without having your brain
consume.
without having your brain explode. So this whole concept of cognitive load, of kind of balancing the audio and visuals as smart glasses become more relevant, I think is going to be, I think we'll see another bump in growth of spatial audio at that point.
Right. And there's an artistic, and Vicky and I talk about this a lot, there's an artistic component of this where when you're creating an experience, whether it's with audio or visuals or both, you kind of dial up to the edge of where you can really see something or really hear something. And then as an artist, you want to dial it back a little bit so that you can't. So instead of seeing it, you're feeling it. Instead of, hearing it, you're feeling it. Because that's really ultimately what, these forms of expression are all about, is giving someone a feeling or a sense of something, a feeling of immersion or a feeling of place or whatever. And so...
or information.
Or information, right.
And I think just basic communication and, like video calling, that has become the norm. And I don't see any change in that. I used to be someone who'd get on a plane and fly to London for one meeting, and I thought nothing of it. And now we don't really necessarily have to do that. But there is, I think, a desire to be more present in video conferencing and just our day-to-day remote worlds, that we want to be closer to the other people that we're communicating with.
And I feel like there was a research paper published somewhat recently that was talking about the difference between flat, stereo or even mono audio and spatial audio, and just the amount of that it was easier on the brain, right? In terms of, having a Zoom call that was just all coming at you at once versus kind of having a spatial way of understanding that audio.
Right. So there's a term for that. So there's the cocktail party effect, which is a well-documented psychological effect where if you're in a room of 100 people and one person is talking, you can focus on them. And what happens in a Zoom call or even a phone call is if you have 20 people on the other end of the line, they're all coming from this single point source. And so your brain can't parse those different voices, even though you can hear the change in timbre of somebody's voice or whatever. And so with stereo, you have a sort of a planar, flat image in front of you. And with spatial audio, you have depth to it. And really everything is spatial audio. It's just how spatial, right? So mono is spatial audio, but it's a point in space, so it's
Right.
very bad space. Stereo is a slightly better space, and then spatial audio is a much better space, and that really helps with cognitive load because your brain is, your biology is geared to parse audio that is spatial. So if you take that away, then your brain is struggling and it's hard, and you get Zoom fatigue and all the other things that people are experiencing.
Right. Are either of you working on any projects with remote productivity right now, or
So Bose
Tools.
has
that you can talk about?
remote productivity. So we have a sound bar that has a camera in it. So it's like a workplace, and it has not only spatial audio on the delivery side, but it has spatial audio on the microphone side, where there's a beam-forming microphone that can follow you around the room. So as you're walking around the room, it's making sure that you're the point of focus for the listening part of it, and on the other side, on the playback side of it, you're spatially placed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We are going to have time for questions, so if there are questions, get them ready. I'm not sure how that happens, but Rosario will help. But before we do that, I just want to ask one more question, which is for people that are out here that want to stay in touch with the latest and what's happening with immersive audio and spatial audio, where would you point them?
I would point them to Martin Rieger's VR Tongue blog. He's a guy who's incredibly articulate about spatial audio, and you can look him up on LinkedIn. I think he has
VR Tongue.
VR Tongue. It's VRTUNG. It's German, I'm sure.
Okay.
But that's a great resource for me because he's always hitting the right notes of what's happening in the spatial audio field.
Great.
Yeah, and I just try to read as much in all the tech press as I possibly can, because it is changing on an ongoing basis. It's really tough. It's really tough to keep track of who's handling all of these different pieces. But so I don't have a specific site in mind.
Yeah, I set up a Google alert for spatial audio.
Exactly.
And so that hits me. I used to do a monthly Medium blog that would say, here's all the news in immersive music and audio. If I get inspired, I'll do that again.
Yeah.
But that was a lot of work because to your point, there are a lot of experiences being made. There's a lot of technology changes happening. Thank
Also,
you.
Abbey Road has a great
really?
blog. Yeah.
That's a good
Yeah,
idea.
Myrick Styles at Abbey Road has a blog where he talks about spatial audio too, so that's a good one.
Awesome. Rosario, if we can open it up, if anyone has any questions.
If anybody has a question, please let us know.
Hi, thank you. Is this on?
It is.
Thanks for the talk. I recently saw a haptic device that you can strap over your chest that makes a silent vibration through your chest. I was wondering if there were any other haptics devices or integrations into the tool chain that you know of that are like that to bring the physical
Yeah.
reality of the sound to you in that sort of private listening experience. Thanks.
Yeah, so there's Subpack, and there are other companies. Like I think it's D-Box is another one that does seat-based stuff.
There's one in shoes.
Yes, so that is Susan Pauly, former CEO of Beats, has a company called Drop Labs that has Haptic Sneakers.
Wouldn't
And
that be great if they're in the expo? Let's all hope.
yeah, and it's actually really interesting because she was telling me that there are more nerves in the bottom of your feet for low frequencies. So like if there's a mastodon bearing down on you, you can feel it in the ground, perhaps. And then there's another company that I've been consulting with, Full Body Sound, which uses TINS technology, so it's electrical stimulation driven by audio. And so there's a lot of interesting research going into that space, partly for accessibility, people who don't have hearing or have poor hearing, but also because there are lots of different ways you can experience sound that are not aural.
That's a really good point. Great question.
Thank you, guys.
We can hear you.
Thank you guys so much. Vicky, Matt, amazing. I love the way you broke it down from, content creation, distribution, and then consumption, right? So using the terminology spatial audio feels like a big blunt hammer.
Yes.
When really we're talking about so many different aspects of an experience. We have audio only, and then we have audio visual. There's no audio visual distinction, right? In today. How do you guys think that the language will evolve around, the term spatial audio? Because it's so broad.
Yeah. I think it'll show up in the form of formats. So, you have Dolby Atmos, object-based audio, channel-based audio. So there's some language that people use to describe the production side of things, and then there's language and topologies that people use to describe the rendering side. So if you look at those 3 domains I talked about, on the production domain, the words that we use are, production kinds of words, channel-based and things like that. And then on the rendering side of it, there are experiential words that you can use to describe it. So it's, and those are more about, depth and height. And, so if you just say spatial audio, you're talking about audio that is coming as close to the real experience that you have as someone with 2 ears who listens. You have 7 microseconds between these 2 holes in your head. And the way that sound hits those holes determines how you perceive it. And so on the rendering side, there's also this concept of head tracking, because all of these things are seeking to achieve the real world spatial experience that you have. And so I think the way that the language will evolve will relate to how those functions describe the end experience for someone, and how you would describe how to produce content or do certain tasks to achieve that goal.
Yeah, and I think like when we talk about head-tracked spatial audio, it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue.
Yeah.
But I do feel like immersive audio, people understand that. The people who are not at AWE understand that, and they're like, oh, I like that idea. I want to be in an immersive environment. Immersive is being used in events and all sorts of different contexts. So I do feel like, we have a history of lots and lots of garbled ways of describing like higher fidelity audio. That's been everything from CD quality, uncompressed, HQ quality, all of those kinds of things, which have been completely and utterly lost on the end consumer. So I feel like there is an opportunity here to get the descriptions right for how we differentiate between different technologies, but then we have to get to the point of it being accessible for end consumers to really, really latch onto it.
I think we have time for one more.
Hi folks, great discussion here. Matt, it's great to see you. I have a question about the role of hardware in the process. And there's a lot of focus, I feel like, given to kind of post-production and mixing and the software tools available to create great experiences. Can you talk maybe at a high level around some of the opportunities for creators in terms of capturing, recording, spatial audio, and then for the consumer or for that listening experience, the role that hardware really has to play in optimizing the best listening experience?
So I'll take it into 2 pieces. The first is the capture part. So capturing spatial audio is really hard. There are a bunch of companies that are doing really interesting things with microphones. I'm trying to remember the name of this company in Ukraine that it has a spatial microphone. Zoom has a pretty affordable ambisonic microphone, which has 4 capsules. And so it's the number of capsules, their configuration. There's all kinds of, you have to grasp at lots of straws to capture spatial audio properly. And then the middle, the production part of it is where the magic really happens. So you capture these elements and then you spatialize them using tools like Mach 1 or Dolby Atmos or Sony 360 Reality. And then on the rendering side, if you look at the arc of out loud speakers, it started with, literally a speaker, mono, and then 2 speakers, and then quad speakers, and then not quad speakers, and then 5.1, and then 7.1, and then, sound bars that simulate 7.1, and then Dolby Atmos with height channels. And so the arc of that story is more speakers, like NHK, and Japanese television had a 22.4 system that they were touting at, NAB, years ago. But the progression is going to go to virtualization of speakers. So I only have 2 ears. So I don't need that many speakers to make sound go in my face. There are 2 speakers here that are right next to my ears. Headphones, 2 speakers right next to my ears. And so the real innovation and the things that will democratize this stuff from a hardware point of view is being able to simulate environments and simulate speakers and setups for the purpose of having an immersive experience with just the things next to your ears. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Maybe, yes, we have time for one more. Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, my name's Danby. I'm also a product manager at Niantic. What's up?
Woot.
Shout out.
So I love this talk because I'm a product manager on the Geodata platform.
Yes.
So we have the same degree.
Pitter patter.
Yeah, remote sensing.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm just kind of like super curious about audio and the power of audio, the power of sound in our experiences. And a lot of the conversation was on sort of creation of music and creation of these compositions and these pieces. But I'm sort of wondering, like, do you think that there is a marketplace for not active creation of sound, but just the passive sort of recording of sound? Like, I'm thinking, what about the music of the city, the bustling of a busy cafe, the sound of the street in Toronto where the streetcars are clacking by? Like, these are the types of
You're making me blush.
scenes that like I like to like kind of tweet about and stuff now and
Yeah.
then. But like, is there a marketplace for that? Is that what creators are looking for? Is that maybe a gateway for people who don't consider themselves to be super creative to kind of get into the world of audio?
100,000%. Absolutely. I mean, I think that, music is an expression of a very particular kind of feeling in a very particular kind of form. It's like poetry. It has, a meter
Structure.
and a structure. But democratizing the recording and delivery of sound is kind of my son. It's really like what warms my heart and makes me get up in the morning, because that's absolutely the most pure form of expression, is to deliver an experience through space and through time without those constraints to other people. And so imagine a spatial audio portal that you can open for anybody in the world so that they can hear the space that you're in.
Well, and just before this session, I was talking with someone, we were talking about, the street sounds of Bangkok versus what London sounds like, and, how you immediately get a sense of space. But there's also one of the most beautiful, simple things that I've seen recently about just environmental sound is the forests, where you can go and you can listen to all of the different forest sounds. And, like these really, really simple things that I feel like technology can bring all of that to us. And it's really powerful, because that's part of the immersion in everyday life, right? Is that we're out and about and we start to associate, the smells, sounds, and the visuals with different points in our life. And that's the same thing with music, where it pulls on the heartstrings and it just conjures up memories, and that makes up who we are as human beings. So I completely agree. I think there's an enormous opportunity there.
Mark Ronson just did a show on Apple TV Plus called Watch the Sound. I don't know.
so good.
I highly recommend it for anyone that hasn't done it. But, talking about distortion and auto-tune and some other things. But I feel like in 5 years, he could do one on spatial audio, and I'd love to see you both on that show. Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah. Anyway, thank you both for coming and sharing your experiences. And we'll be around if you want to talk after the panel.